This episode of Instant Analysis is brought to you by Platinum Storage Group and Real Estate Investments. From outside the Stanley Moss Courthouse, I'm Keely Eure here with Dan Weber. Instant analysis of Day 6 of the Todd McNair versus NCAA trial. It's Day 6, but it's technically Day 2 of testimony. Today we heard from Angie Cretors, who was the former investigator, one of the co-head investigators for the Reggie Bush case. Let's get into it. Before we get into the details, let's go into the main general recap of what happened today.
I think today was a good day because you kind of got to see both sides in their cases through Angie Cretors. And basically, it's a matter of who do you believe in credibility and how do they believe what they believe. And I think the NCAA essentially has to defend how do you justify doing what they did to Todd McNair and USC in the bargain on some of the facts that were not correct and not accurate. And then in terms of then the NCAA got a chance to talk to Angie Cretors this afternoon, and they went into as many things as they could find that would tell you why they believed Lloyd Lake and why they did not believe Todd McNair. So we had dueling credibility issues today. So, and if this was the first time that you saw maybe some blows landed on Todd McNair, and so and it tells you there's a lot to come.
Yeah. As far as the details go, on Todd McNair's side, we've talked about this before. They kind of go into how the NCAA conducted the whole Reggie Bush case, all that surrounding it. The interesting part is going into that January 8th phone call with Todd McNair and Lloyd Lake. It was interesting. Bruce Burleigh, the head lawyer for Todd McNair, kind of pressed Angie on how they conducted that interview surrounding that call. And they didn't go into where Lloyd Lake was when he made that call. Was he intoxicated?
Was he on drugs?
Yeah.
They went right after. They said, they weren't messing around.
Yeah. But she answered they did not. All they really got from that interview with Lloyd Lake was the substance of that call, which is still in question of what that call actually was about.
Well, I mean, I think when you say, but the substance we agreed with, it checked out. No matter if we got wrong who made the call, if we got wrong the year the call was made, we know what he said was true. And you think, wait a minute, this is the guy who went to Radio Shack to get tape recording equipment so he could record his calls. And he recorded 2 with Reggie Bush, 2 with Reggie's stepdad, Lamar Griffin, and yet he didn't record this call, which they say is the most important call. Did you ask him about that? Did you ask why? Did you question yourself about the credibility of that being the call he didn't record? And they said, no, we just believed him.
Yeah. The other thing that was interesting is that it came out that Angie said there's no evidence implicating USC or Todd McNair prior to Lloyd Lake's 2007 interview. So before that, there wasn't really anything tying USC or Todd McNair. It wasn't until that Lloyd Lake interview that took a while to get.
And then they said they ran all the phone records, and they're like, for those of you who maybe remember what a real old-time phone book looks like, and they got 4 hits of one call, which they say correctly now, Lloyd Lake made to Todd McNair, and 3 calls on October 29th in 2005, I guess, when Lloyd Lake's phone was called by Todd McNair. Their explanation is that was the night the famous photo was taken. That was the night they were all out. And it shows that Todd knew Lloyd Lake. Todd's explanation has always been that was the night that Reggie Bush was supposed to take Percy Harvin out as his guest after the Washington State game, and that Reggie had gone out with his parents and with family friend Lloyd Lake and Michael Michaels, and they couldn't locate him to pick up Percy Harvin at the hotel. And the story is that his cell phone had the battery had run dead, and he had given Todd Lloyd Lake's number because he was with Lloyd Lake. And Todd called the number 3 times and finally got Reggie to come get Percy Harvin. This is one of those, which one do you believe? But in all of the time they really don't have much in the way of contacts between Todd and Lloyd Lake, but that's, they're hanging their hat on the ones they do, and they're basically relitigating the information and the evidence in the USC, Reggie Bush, Todd McNair, NCAA case.
One of the most interesting parts of today was surrounding the findings report from the COI, the Committee on Infractions. When they were drafting that report, they sent it back to the investigators to make sure that they're getting all the facts correct. The facts surrounding that January 8th call was wrong. And so Bruce Burleigh kind of pushed in on that and said it was a false statement in that report that they didn't correct. Angie never corrected it. And she said it was a paraphrase, which caused some controversy. There was a sidebar, and then they came back. So break that down a little bit in more detail for us. What happened in that whole back and forth?
Well, I mean, basically, I don't even think we all knew the exact tick-tock of how this happened, but the committee writes their report on the findings on the USC case. And in there, they still have the phone call wrong. They have it, the way they had reported it earlier. They have it from Todd McNair, and they have the year wrong. So when that report is given to the enforcement staff, whose only duty supposedly is just correct any errors of fact. So it goes through them, and it comes back, and when the final report is issued, they have the call correct. It's made by Lloyd Lake, and it's made in 2006. The issue is they never told anybody about it. They just changed it. And so in pursuing that, Todd's lawyers wanted to know, who changed it.
Yeah.
When was it changed? Angie couldn't tell you. Now, she was the lead investigator. She was in on the interview where they got the call wrong. She wasn't the one that asked that. Richard Johannemeyer did. But she was saying that she knew he was asking the wrong date and the wrong person to call. So she says she'd known it all along. But nobody changed it. Nobody. Now, they will say, but, Todd had a chance to explain himself at the hearing. He could have, explained himself. I think that's a little bit of a push when you say we didn't even admit, when that was. To not know, I think that the thing that Todd's attorneys are going to, zero in on is it was changed in the process after the committee had deliberated, and no one knows who changed it. I think that's kind of the crucial issue on that particular point. Who changed it? And then Bruce Burleigh asked a couple of times, wasn't that factually inaccurate, the way it was reported? Was that not factually inaccurate? And Angie did not want to say that it was, and she said something to the effect that the way it ended up when they got it right, that was a paraphrase of the original. Well, no, it wasn't. It was a complete reversal of the original and a complete changing of the year and changing of who made the call. It wasn't a paraphrase, but that was the best she could come up with until finally, I don't know how many times Bruce had to ask it, 3? Yeah. And she finally admitted, maybe it was factually inaccurate. Mm-hmm. Yes.
How do you think that played out to the jury? Because that was one of the more heated moments so far. How do you think that played out?
I don't know. I would think they look at it and say it's either true or it's not true. It's either factually accurate or it's factually inaccurate. And if you say, we got it wrong, but it was still okay, I would think that wouldn't play very well with people. There are some things that are sort of either black or white, and that might be one of them. Either you got it right or you got it wrong. She didn't quite want to admit that they got it wrong and they changed it and they didn't exactly tell anybody. Mm-hmm.
The NCAA also got the chance to interview Angie. It wasn't exactly a cross-examination because she's also their witness. I don't really know the exact technical terms on that, but you mentioned that they were able to land some blows on Todd McNair. I think the biggest thing to come out of today was Todd McNair was asked if he had contact with Reggie Bush outside of games or practice.
Well, we know the NCAA says that's the question they asked him. Yeah. Did you have any contact other than during the season with Reggie Bush.
Mm-hmm. And Todd McNair said he had next to no contact with Reggie Bush. Now, when they look at Todd McNair's phone records, it ends up in a span of between December 2004 to February 2006. He made 599 calls to Reggie Bush, which doesn't really seem as next to no contact. So, from a football standpoint, just the term outside of practice or games, you would assume that a coach would talk to their player like that. Why would Todd McNair not really, why would he answer in that form?
See, I don't think we know, I don't know if there's a recording of that interview or whatever, and do we know, was the exact question, what sort of contact do you have? I mean, was there personal contact, whatever, outside of the season and all that kind of thing. I think but it's certainly something that Todd's going to have to answer when he's up, and I think he's already down for a 7-hour stint on the stand, and I would think they're going to really go to places like that, and what I guess you could say, hey, that was in-person contact. When the season was over, we let the guys go, but I keep up with them on the phone. I absolutely keep up, because that's when the assistant coaches are out recruiting, and they're not always on campus. So, but we don't know. We don't have an answer, because that's why they have trials, so Todd can give that answer and they can ask that question. But it's something that has to be answered.
Mm-hmm. At this point in the trial, do you think that hurts Todd's credibility?
I guess. That might be one of those things that you can't answer until you see how they deal with it, which is why they would tell the jurors, wait till you heard all the evidence and whatever. But it certainly would be something that if you were Todd, you'd want to answer that, because they have made a big deal out of that. That was really showing you that he wasn't credible with what he was saying about Reggie Bush. So, he's got to answer it. But I'm not going to make any judgments about which way that goes or what the whole thing means. I don't think we know. But it's an issue, and the NCAA is not letting it go. And it's interesting, because we're always thinking that the January 8th, 2006 phone call and who made it and was the big issue, and it turns out maybe the phone calls between Todd and Reggie Bush are more of an issue coming out of today, which, that's why they have trials, because they put the evidence out there, and both sides have to deal with it.
Yeah. On the issue of credibility, it was interesting how Angie described why she found Lloyd Lake credible. She said that despite his criminal background, he was able to provide records and receipts that backed up things that he said. But there's some things that don't necessarily match up with what Lloyd Lake said. How do you understand what her reasoning behind that?
For example, she was there when he was interviewed and said he made 2 calls to Todd in whatever that July, I guess it was, and they couldn't find a record, certainly of the one, and I think they could only find a record of one call ever that he made to Todd. So they say, well, does that not hurt his credibility if he told you something that didn't check out? She said no. Then they said, he also said he was listening in on a speakerphone when Pete Carroll called in and told Reggie's parents how they could put together a lease so it looked like they were leasing the house, which would be a major violation for Pete Carroll. And they said they went and checked every place they could, every phone record, every call that they could come up with, and they could find no evidence of Pete Carroll ever making that call. And so the question was, well, does that harm Lloyd Lake's credibility? Does that make you believe him less? And she said, no, not at all. So in effect, you almost come away thinking she still believes him about the Pete Carroll phone call, which I would think Pete Carroll wouldn't be very happy to know that the NCAA still thinks that he may have made that phone call, because she said, well, I could have called it from some other phone, a payphone, or da-da.
Well, that's what I'm going to ask you about, because as far as Todd McNair and Pete Carroll, she kind of had add-ons to her answers, like, oh, well, they could have made phone calls elsewhere that weren't showed up on that didn't show up on records. Whereas for Lloyd Lake, I don't think that skepticism was as applied, or at least she didn't say it during her testimony. Do you feel like her skepticism is equally applied to everyone she investigated?
No, it's so obviously not. Because basically, all they said was on the phone call that Todd was supposed to have made, that Lloyd Lake made in the middle of the night, all they wanted him to say apparently was, I just told him about what the benefits Reggie were getting, and he's got to make this right, and he can't go with these other agents, and blah, blah, blah. And he did all that. And you would have thought maybe they would have said, well, tell us exactly what you said. How did you get an answering machine, or, where did it go, and was Todd awake, and where were you, the whole question about where you were and all that. They didn't ask him any of those qualifiers at all. They basically said, he told us what he said, and we totally believed him. I mean, and no record, they didn't say, well, Lloyd, you were recording these other calls. Why didn't you record that call? That seems like an important call. Or if it's really that important a call, why did you make it at 1:36 in the morning on a Saturday night? What's going on here? I don't think we saw much skepticism about Lloyd Lake. There just didn't seem to be any. And I think that's something they're going to have to defend, because if you're going to be skeptical, and they keep saying, well, we weren't skeptical about Todd until, but then they were very skeptical about Todd, and yet they never became skeptical about Lloyd Lake. Mm-hmm. Who knows? I mean, and they talked about how difficult it was to get the interview because he was putting all conditions. They couldn't get it until right after he had sued Reggie. And she said she called him every month to try to get the interview. She even went to visit him in prison to ask for the interview. And so it wasn't a case like when they said, well, did you know he would? She said, yeah, she visited him in prison. So, but they chose to believe him and not Todd McNair.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the details surrounding how they got that interview with Lloyd Lake, it seemed like Costa, the head lawyer for the NCAA, was making the case, like he said, that they had to get the interview however they could. Not having USC there, not having McNair's attorneys there. Why are they justifying it in that way? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, I think they say that had they not gotten that interview, they couldn't have gone forward with the USC case. And they were basically kind of saying, it would have been kind of small potatoes, kind of a violation of one player taking improper benefits and becoming ineligible and playing in games, causing them to lose those games. And I know we've talked to a number of NCAA experts and consultants, and they say playing an ineligible player is worth maybe 2 or at the most 3 scholarships, and they got 30. So as much as they say, and this is where I think the NCAA, the burden is on them, where they say we gave Todd a really 1-year show cause, and we gave him unethical conduct, but it really wasn't that bad a penalty. But what they gave USC was a really bad penalty. So some might say, I wonder if that makes the point that Todd McNair wasn't the person they were out to get. Maybe they were out to get USC. That's a question that I think, I would guess Todd's attorneys are going to explore. Was that involved? They've already said, the NCAA, absolutely not. It had nothing to do. We didn't think about it. We didn't do it. Well, we'll see.
Mm-hmm. So we just went through the main details of today in chronological order. Costa is not done interviewing Angie, so that will actually happen tomorrow morning. That was supposed to be done today, but we're still behind. And then tomorrow we'll hear from Rod Uphoff. What are you expecting from that?
I'm looking forward to this one. He was the brand new member of the Committee on Infractions, a non-voting member who wrote some really incendiary emails saying things like, he knows best, and he's worried about, they may be too soft, and USC, could walk and all that. He and Roscoe Howard, who they were talking about, I think we're only going to get a deposition on him, but those were the two newcomers, observers, and clearly the theory of the USC people, or excuse me, of the McNair people, is that they had undue influence on the committee and on the deliberations, and when they couldn't decide on Todd, which was the thing that held them up day after day after day, that when they started circulating the emails among themselves, that Judge Schaller looked at and said, real potential of malice and bias and all of that, then by the end of the deliberations, they got people to come around and decided that Todd was deserving of unethical conduct. And basically the position have not changed even a little bit since 2010. I mean, the line that the NCAA struck today is the exact line that they struck in 2010. There has been no evolution, it looks like, in the NCAA's position at all.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for Day 6 of the Todd McNair NCAA trial. For Dan Weber, I'm Keely Eure. For more, check out uscfootball.com.